My name is Liza Morgan, 32 years old, a pediatric nurse at County General. I've always believed that actions speak louder than words, that consistency matters more than grand gestures. I spent years taking care of other people's children, wiping tears, calming fears, making sure someone was there when it mattered. I thought I understood love because I practiced compassion every single day. Then I met Ryan Fletcher, and for 3 years, I learned the difference between caring for someone and being taken for granted. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The moment that changed everything happened on a Saturday evening in his parents' dining room, under a crystal chandelier that cost more than my monthly rent. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it started, so you understand why that dinner wasn't just embarrassing. It was the final piece of a puzzle I'd been too tired to see clearly. I met Ryan at a hospital charity event 3 years ago, one of those forced networking evenings where doctors and donors mingled over expensive wine and tiny food. He was charming, well-dressed, a financial analyst who spoke confidently about markets and investments. When he asked about my work, he actually listened. He called pediatric nursing a calling, said it took a special kind of strength. I felt seen in a way I hadn't in years. Within weeks, we were inseparable. He moved into my apartment after 8 months. It was small, a 1-bedroom in a neighborhood his friends called quaint, which I knew meant not expensive enough for their taste. But it was mine. I'd saved for the deposit, picked out every piece of furniture, painted the walls myself on weekends between double shifts. Ryan said he loved how cozy it felt, how real. He said his downtown loft had always felt empty, that my place had heart. I believed him. At first, things felt balanced. He'd cook dinner sometimes, surprise me with flowers after a long shift, rub my feet while I told him about difficult cases. His career was taking off, meetings in glass towers, business trips to cities I'd never visited. Mine stayed steady, reliable, the same hospital hallways, the same scrubs, the same satisfaction of knowing I'd made a child smile through their fear. He called my job noble. I called his job practical. We seemed to fit. But somewhere in year 2, the balance shifted. He started talking about his future, his career trajectory, his 5-year plan. Notice the pronouns. His, never ours. When I mentioned wanting to take a certification course to specialize in pediatric oncology, he nodded absently and changed the subject to his upcoming promotion. When I asked if he'd thought about our future, maybe moving somewhere bigger together, he said we had time, that he needed to focus on his career first. I told myself he was stressed, that ambitious people think differently, that love means being patient. His friends were all like him, finance guys with expensive watches and weekend golf games. Their girlfriends were models, aspiring actresses, women who posted gym selfies and vacation photos. They were beautiful and fun and always available for last-minute trips. I was a nurse who worked holidays and smelled like hospital antiseptic. At gatherings, they'd ask what I did with polite smiles that never reached their eyes, then turn back to conversations about markets I didn't understand. Ryan never defended me, never brought me into the conversation. He just let me sit there, invisible. I started noticing the small things that year. How Ryan would schedule dinners with his colleagues on nights he knew I had early shifts, then act disappointed when I couldn't stay out late. How he'd introduce me at events with just my name, never mentioning what I did, as if my profession was something to gloss over. How his parents would call and he'd step into another room, lowering his voice, and when I asked what they talked about, he'd say just work stuff, nothing important. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. His mother, Patricia Fletcher, was a retired interior designer who still consulted for wealthy clients. His father, Donald, owned a chain of luxury car dealerships across 3 states. They lived in a gated community where the houses had names instead of numbers. The few times I'd met them, Patricia had smiled tightly and asked polite questions about my job before steering conversation elsewhere. Donald barely looked up from his phone. Ryan always made excuses for them afterward. "They're just old-fashioned," he'd say. "They'll warm up to you." I covered our rent most months. Ryan said his student loans were crushing him, that he was investing heavily in his portfolio, that once his big promotion came through, everything would balance out. I believed him because I wanted to. I paid for groceries, utilities, even his car insurance twice when he claimed his accounts were temporarily tied up. He promised to pay me back. He never did. When I brought it up gently, he'd sigh and say he thought we were partners, that keeping score wasn't what love looked like. So I stopped mentioning it. His social media told a different story than our reality. Photos of him at upscale restaurants, in tailored suits, toasting with colleagues at rooftop bars. He was always available for those. Meanwhile, I worked doubles to cover the bills he promised to split. I watched him spend money on things that projected success while I quietly made sure we had enough for rent. The disconnect didn't make sense until much later, when I realized the image mattered more to him than the truth. By year 3, I was exhausted, not just from work, but from the constant feeling that I was auditioning for a role I'd never actually get. He'd mention his future like I wasn't part of it, talking about the penthouse he wanted downtown, the luxury car he'd buy himself as a reward, the trips he'd take once he made partner. I'd ask where I fit into these plans, and he'd kiss my forehead and say, "Of course you're part of it, babe, I just need to get established first." Established. As if 3 years wasn't enough time to know whether someone was worth including in your future. His friends started making comments. Jokes about how long we'd been together, about when Ryan would finally settle down with someone serious. I was right there, sitting next to him, and they'd say these things like I was furniture. Ryan would laugh awkwardly, never correcting them, never defending what we had. I'd smile through it, go home, and cry in the shower where he couldn't hear me. Then I'd wake up, put on my scrubs, and save the day for kids who needed me, because at least there I knew my value. The dinner invitation came on a Tuesday. Patricia called Ryan while we were watching television. I could hear her voice through the phone, sharp and insistent. When he hung up, he looked uncomfortable. "My parents want us to come to dinner Saturday night," he said. It sounded more like a sentencing than an invitation. I asked if everything was okay. He shrugged. "They just want to see us." The way he said us felt wrong, like the word didn't quite include me the way it should. I bought a new dress for the occasion, navy blue and elegant, something that would meet Patricia's standards. I got my hair done professionally, wore the pearl earrings my grandmother left me. I wanted to make a good impression, to finally break through whatever wall existed between me and his family. Ryan barely noticed. He was on his phone the entire drive to their house, texting someone, distracted. I asked if he was nervous. He said no. I should have recognized that as the first lie of the evening. The Fletcher house was exactly what I expected. Marble entryway, vaulted ceilings, artwork that probably cost more than I'd make in 5 years. Patricia greeted us at the door wearing cream linen and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Donald shook Ryan's hand firmly and nodded at me like I was the help. We were ushered into a dining room where the table could seat 12 but was set for 4. Everything felt choreographed, intentional, like a stage set for something I hadn't rehearsed for. Dinner started civilly enough. Patricia asked about Ryan's work, and he launched into a detailed explanation of a recent deal he'd closed. She listened with rapt attention, asking follow-up questions, praising his intelligence and drive. Donald chimed in with advice about networking and building relationships with the right people. I sat there, cutting my salmon into smaller and smaller pieces, waiting for someone to acknowledge I existed. When Patricia finally turned to me, her tone shifted. "And how's the hospital, Liza? Still doing the children's ward?" Still. As if I'd been stuck there, as if my career was something I hadn't chosen but fallen into. "I'm specializing in pediatric oncology," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I start my certification program next month." "Oh," Patricia said, her smile tight. "That must be very rewarding." The word rewarding hung in the air like a dismissal, as if rewarding was code for not profitable. Donald didn't even look up from his wine. Ryan said nothing. He just reached for more bread, chewing slowly, avoiding my eyes. I felt the first crack then, a hairline fracture in my chest that I tried to ignore. The conversation moved on without me. They talked about Ryan's colleague who just bought a vacation home in Aspen. They discussed investment strategies and market predictions. Patricia mentioned a friend's daughter who worked in corporate law and had just made junior partner. Every topic was a reminder of a world I didn't belong to, a world where success meant money and status, not saving lives. I excused myself to use the restroom, mostly to breathe, to remind myself that I wasn't invisible even though I felt like it. When I returned, the atmosphere had shifted. Patricia was leaning forward, her hands folded on the table, her expression serious. Ryan looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat. Donald was watching his son with expectation. I sat down slowly, sensing I'd walked into the middle of something important. "Ryan," Patricia said, her voice gentle but firm, "your father and I have been talking. We think it's time you start thinking seriously about your future." I glanced at Ryan. He was staring at his plate. His future. Not our future. Patricia continued, her eyes flickering to me briefly before returning to her son. "You're 34 now. You're doing well professionally. It's time to settle down with someone who can match your trajectory, someone who understands the lifestyle you're building." My stomach dropped. I understood exactly what she was saying, even if she was dancing around it. Donald cleared his throat. "We've actually been meaning to introduce you to Catherine Holbrook. Her father owns Holbrook Industries. Sharp girl, went to Yale, works in her father's company. I think you two would really hit it off." Ryan finally looked up, his face flushed. He opened his mouth but no words came out. I waited for him to defend me, to tell his parents they were out of line, that I was his girlfriend and this conversation was inappropriate. He said nothing. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Patricia smiled at me then, a smile that was almost apologetic but not quite. "Liza, you're a sweet girl. You do important work. But you have to understand, Ryan needs someone who can support his ambitions, someone from his world. We're sure you understand." I felt everything inside me go cold and sharp. My hands were steady as I set down my fork. My voice came out calm, clearer than I expected. "I see." Ryan shifted beside me. "Mom," he said weakly. Patricia ignored him, still looking at me. "These things are difficult, but it's better to be honest, don't you think?" I nodded slowly. "Yes, honesty is important." Then I turned to Ryan, my boyfriend of 3 years, the man I'd supported and believed in and built a life around. "Is this how you feel?" He couldn't meet my eyes. His jaw worked like he was chewing words he couldn't swallow. Finally, he spoke, and the words landed like stones. "Liza, you're great. You really are. But my parents have a point. We're just in different places. You're focused on your nursing thing, and I'm trying to build something bigger. I think maybe we've been holding each other back. Holding each other back. As if I hadn't been the one holding us together while he played dress up with his future." Then Donald spoke up, his voice matter of fact. "Son's right. You seem like a nice girl, but let's be realistic. You're a nurse. He needs someone who can keep up socially and financially. Someone who fits." I felt the words like a slap, but I didn't flinch. I looked at Ryan one more time, giving him a chance to prove me wrong. He stared at his wine glass. Patricia leaned back, satisfied. "We knew you'd understand, Liza. You're practical. That's admirable." I picked up my napkin, folded it neatly, and placed it beside my plate. Then I stood, smoothing down my dress. "You're absolutely right, Patricia." I said it with a smile. She looked surprised. Donald raised an eyebrow. Ryan finally looked at me, confused. I turned to him, my voice steady and cold. "You need someone who fits your world. Someone who won't burden you with things like love, loyalty, or basic human decency. I'm sure Catherine will be perfect for you." I walked out of that dining room with my head high, past the expensive artwork and the marble floors, out into the cool night air. I heard Ryan call my name once, half-hearted, but I didn't turn around. I called a rideshare and waited at the end of their long driveway, far enough that I wouldn't have to see him if he followed. He didn't. The driver asked if I was okay. I said yes, and realized I meant it. Something had broken in that dining room, but it wasn't me. When I got home, the apartment felt different. Smaller somehow, but also more honest. I looked around at the space I'd created, the furniture I'd chosen, the walls I'd painted. Ryan's things were scattered everywhere, his laptop on my coffee table, his jackets on my hooks, his shoes by my door. He'd moved into my life so completely that I'd forgotten what it looked like without him. I sat on the couch and waited. He came home 2 hours later, keys jingling, footsteps hesitant. "We need to talk," he said, standing in the doorway like he wasn't sure he was allowed in. I stayed seated, calm. "Go ahead." He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture I used to find endearing. "Look, I'm sorry about how that went. My parents can be intense. They shouldn't have ambushed you like that." I nodded slowly. "But they weren't wrong, were they?" He blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean you agree with them. You've been thinking this for a while." He started to protest, but I held up my hand. "Don't lie to me now, Ryan. Not after 3 years." He deflated, sinking into the chair across from me. "I just think we want different things. You're happy where you are, and that's great. But I need more. I need someone who can grow with me, who understands ambition." I felt the words settle over me like snow, cold but clarifying. "Someone who can afford to keep up with you," I said quietly. He looked away. "That's not what I meant." "Yes, it is. You need someone whose job impresses your parents, whose family has connections, who won't embarrass you at your fancy dinners." He didn't deny it. The silence was answer enough. I stood up, walked to the hallway closet, and pulled out 2 large suitcases I'd stored there. His suitcases, the ones he'd brought when he moved in. I set them on the floor between us. "You have until tomorrow night to pack your things and leave. This is my apartment. My name on the lease. You've never paid a full month's rent in 3 years." His face went red. "That's not fair, Liza. I was going to pay you back." "When?" I asked, my voice sharp now. "When you made partner? When you bought your penthouse? When you married Catherine Holbrook?" He stood up, anger flashing across his face. "You're being cruel." I laughed, a sound that surprised us both. "I'm being cruel? You let your parents insult me to my face. You told me I was holding you back. You've spent 3 years using my home, my money, my support, and the moment it mattered, you couldn't even defend me. That's not cruelty, Ryan. That's just facts." He grabbed his jacket. "Fine. I'll stay at Mark's tonight. I'll get my stuff tomorrow." "Good," I said. "Make sure you get everything. I don't want any reason for you to come back." He walked to the door, paused, and turned back. "You'll regret this. You're throwing away 3 years over one bad dinner." I met his eyes, steady. "No, Ryan. You threw away 3 years the moment you told your parents I wasn't good enough. I just finally heard you." He left, the door closing with a soft click that felt louder than a slam. I locked it behind him, then walked through the apartment, opening windows, letting fresh air push out the staleness. I didn't cry. Not yet. I had work to do. Ryan came back the next evening with Mark and another friend, both looking uncomfortable. They loaded boxes while I sat at the kitchen table, sipping tea, watching them work. Ryan kept glancing at me like he expected an explosion, tears, begging. I gave him nothing but silence. When they finished, he stood in the doorway one last time. "Take care of yourself, Liza." I nodded. "You too." The door closed, and the apartment exhaled. The first week was strange. I kept expecting him to walk in, to hear his voice, to see his things cluttering my space. Instead, there was quiet. I rearranged the furniture, reclaimed the closet, cooked meals I actually wanted to eat. My coworkers noticed something different about me. "You seem lighter," one said. I smiled. "I feel lighter." 2 weeks later, I heard through a mutual friend that Ryan was dating Catherine Holbrook. They'd made it official on social media, pictures of them at charity galas and wine tastings. I felt nothing. Not anger, not jealousy, just a mild curiosity about how long it would take her to realize what I already knew. A month passed. Then 2. I focused on my certification program, threw myself into work, started saying yes to things I'd been too tired for before. Dinner with friends, weekend hikes, a pottery class I'd always wanted to try. I remembered who I was before I'd spent 3 years making myself smaller to fit someone else's vision. One Saturday morning, my phone buzzed. A text from Ryan. "Can we talk? I miss you." I stared at it for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. 6 months later, I saw him at a coffee shop near the hospital. He was alone, looking tired, scrolling through his phone. I almost walked past, but he looked up and saw me. "Liza," he said, standing quickly. "Hey." "Hi, Ryan." He asked how I was. I told him about my new specialty, the cases I was working on, the kids I was helping. He listened with something like regret in his eyes. "I made a mistake," he said quietly. "Catherine and I broke up. She wasn't what I thought." I nodded. "I hope you find what you're looking for." He reached for my hand. "Maybe we could try again? Start over?" I pulled my hand back gently. "I already started over, Ryan. And it doesn't include you." I walked away, coffee in hand, feeling nothing but gratitude for the woman who'd sat at that dinner table and finally chosen herself. Some phases aren't meant to last. Some are meant to teach you what you deserve. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.